You're good to go, sir.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our 6 o'clock informational session on our text amendments. We had an earlier session today at noon, and we had several more participants than we do now. I think we've only got 4 or 5 of you, and I think it sometimes happens, staff outnumbers the residents. But we do have a presentation, and we are able to take questions as we go along. So if it's okay with you, we're going to get started, and we will kind of go through our slides fairly quickly. There aren't very many of them to begin with. And as we share the screen now, we'll get going. And with that said, let's go to the next slide, please. So the purpose of this evening session is to provide some general information about the 4 text amendments that we filed, a tree ordinance text amendment and 3 UDO text amendments, and to also share the schedule and how we're going to move forward with these text amendments, and finally how to submit questions about either the tree ordinance or the UDO. Next slide, please. And the way that we'll do this is that we'll present some information. We'll have some stopping points after each segment to stop and take questions. We ask that you use the Zoom chat feature if you've got questions along the way, and if we see them, we will try to answer them in real time. And if we can't do that completely, we'll stop at the end of the segment and go back to any questions that we have left unanswered. Next slide, please. So I'm going to turn it over to our Chief Urban Forester, Tim Porter, to cover the tree ordinance text amendment. Tim?
And hey, Alan, before we go too far, should we maybe just introduce the staff that are on?
I'm sorry.
So know who's here.
Thank you, Laura. I meant to do that. I'm Alan Goodwin. I'm the Deputy Project Manager for the UDO. Laura Harmon is here. She's the UDO Project Manager. And we also have Kevin May from our UDO team and Sandy Montgomery from the UDO team. We have, as I just introduced, Tim Porter, our Chief Urban Forester, as well as Ellen Price from City Solid Waste. And where did, I'm sorry, did we lose Joe? No, Joe Hack. I'm not seeing him on my screen. Sorry, Joe. Joe Hack from County Solid Waste. Have I missed anybody? I think I've got everyone. Okay. Go ahead, Tim.
Okay, thanks, Alan, and good afternoon or evening, everybody. Next slide, I will briefly summarize the very minor proposed changes to the Charlotte tree ordinance. A very brief review is the tree ordinance moving forward is a non-development ordinance, and it was amended in lockstep and timing with the adoption of the UDO. All development regulations in the tree ordinance were removed last year, and the proposed changes to the ordinance we have for this text amendment are very minor. There's some sequencing, mislabeling errors. We jumped from letter G to H in one section, so we have to correct some labeling and sequencing errors. And we're proposing to add the language in red on the screen there that clarifies the city's intent on how to use any penalty and fine revenue collected through the enforcement of the tree ordinance. And that would be to further the purpose, intent, and spirit of the requirements of the tree ordinance. This language previously used to be in the tree ordinance and it was inadvertently removed. So we're putting that back in there. So these are very minor changes. And I'm happy to, I want to also say on the next slide, if there are any questions Later on, you can contact the urban forestry team here on the Charlotte Development Center website. There's urban forestry contacts if you click the trees button down there, and we can definitely answer and discuss any questions, look at some issues you may have offline. But today, if there are any questions now, I'm happy to take those. And I think that's all I have for slides.
Thank you, Tim. I don't see any questions in chat. If we're going to move on, if you do have questions later on, we can get back to them and try to get answers for you if we can. Okay, let's move on to the next text amendment, which is number 2023-058, and we're calling this the UDO cleanup text amendment. Next slide. And this is a text amendment that we anticipated needing to make as soon as the UDO was adopted this past August. The UDO is scheduled to go into effect on June 1st, and we always anticipated that there would be a need for some cleanup and minor modifications to the adopted UDO before it goes into effect in June. And so if this text amendment is adopted, it will make some minor changes, and I'll just go through what they are really quickly. It will update language to provide greater clarity where we can, update and insert new graphics and illustrations, adjust language to provide better consistency with General Statute 160D, update terminology and definitions, correct references where needed, adjustments to some use permissions and prescribed conditions, minor changes to development standards, and correction of Scrivener's errors such as misspellings and punctuation and so forth. So next slide. That's it on the cleanup text amendment. I do see that there were a couple of questions entered in chat. If Tim is still with us, don't know whether, Tim, are you still here? I'm not seeing all of the participants.
He had to go to a tree advisory committee meeting, so he's not with us any longer.
Thank you, Kevin. Can we go back then to that slide previous, a couple of previous slides to this so that we can share again where people should go to submit questions on trees? There you go. The Charlotte Development Center website, charlottenc.gov/development center, will take you to the Development Center's homepage, and then click on the trees button in the lower right-hand corner, and that will have an email contact, Henry Kunzig, that you can email these questions to Jim and Andy. I know that you've asked those questions in chat. I apologize, I had to duck out. But if you submit those questions through that website, I'm sure you'll get some answers. And do see a question from Ellen. This does relate to the cleanup text amendment. Why was the parapet height increased from 4 to 5 feet? And what that question is referencing, I believe, is that in our measurement of maximum building height, we do not count the height of a parapet for a flat roof building. And I believe that we did increase it in this text amendment from 4 to 5 feet. I don't know if somebody can help me with the rationale.
Yeah, it's interesting, Alan. I think I just literally maybe within the last 15 to 20 minutes had a conversation with Laura about this. And hi, Ellen, thanks for your question. What we had discovered was actually we were asked to look at this parapet height from a couple of different angles, both externally for practitioners, but also internally from our land development staff. And it seems to be that the additional 12 inches offers some measure of flexibility for practitioners, but is also something that was a little bit of a rub that our land development staff was bumping up against in projects that were submitted. And so to kind of accommodate the requests from both angles, that is why the height was adjusted from 4 to 5. And Laura, I don't know if you had any additional seasoning yourself, excuse me.
Well, just to add that currently usually parapet walls are used for screening of mechanical equipment and so forth, and that is currently allowed at 5 feet in the current zoning ordinance. So
Yeah,
said that we were not making folks non-conforming on that item unnecessarily.
there is that. And I appreciate that reminder, Laura. And also, I think we talked about the fact that this adjustment from 4 to 5 in the cleanup text amendment would actually, because of that 5-foot allowance for screening, we potentially could have had in the UDO two different measures of height of parapets. And we thought for ease of administration and for uniformity throughout the UDO to align those to 5 feet made the most sense.
Thank you both, Kevin and Laura, for that clarification. Ellen, I hope that answered your question. Not seeing any other questions on the UDO cleanup text amendment. Kevin, if we could share again and move on to the text amendment
Hey,
2023-057.
Alan, if we could let Ellen unmute, because she did say she was still a little bit confused on that. Maybe we could hear what the confusion is and
Sure.
that resolved.
1 second. Ellen, if you want to try to unmute, you
Yeah,
should be able to.
sure. Yeah, thank you. No, we had a quite a large back and forth. We were doing comparison on a recent rezoning about UDO standards versus PED versus what the mud ordinance would allow. So we were looking at the building heights. And this was something that we kind of learned in that process, that the 4 feet was not going to count toward the building height, whereas it would have in the current ordinance. And that's why I think several of us on the land use committee latched onto this when we saw that it had increased to an additional foot. And I'm afraid, Kevin, I'm sure that was a good explanation, but I just didn't follow it. It almost sounded to me like it seemed more convenient. So I don't want to belabor that. I'm sorry, my dog is chiming in. I mean, we can just have a conversation. Maybe, that might make more sense than dragging everybody through this minutia. I don't know.
Sure. And I think, Ellen, we've also received that question from other sources. And so I think that we still owe actually some response and feedback. It might have even been to another member of the land use committee. So happy to do that.
That'd be great. And I'm sure it
Yeah.
was, because we talk about this and we're just perplexed.
Sure. Understood.
Well, and just to clarify, Ellen, and we can go back and provide the language, but a parapet wall up to 5 feet is allowed in the current ordinance if it is screening equipment on the top of the building.
Right, and that's very situational, and I get it. In this particular situation, it was not screening any equipment, so we went back and forth on this parapet, and I would just like to, I really, again, I don't want to drag everybody through this parapet talk, so maybe we could just have a call or something, or just tell me how best to submit this so I can share it with the land use committee, what the answer is.
And we've gotten this comment from John Friday, so we are going to put something as well as some other comments in response. I assume you guys have talked about this together.
Yeah, the committee has.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that was one of the things we noticed. So that would be, I mean, just not so that you don't have to keep doing it one off. Just take care of us with one email or something.
Sure. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you. Let's move on to our next text amendment, 2023-057. It's a text amendment to the UDO for use adjustments for general commercial and regional commercial zoning districts in centers place types. Next slide, thank you. If we can just back up a little bit and talk briefly about place types, because they are going to come into play in this text amendment conversation. As you probably know, we've mapped the city and assigned one of 10 place types to every parcel in the city. And you can see the place types listed there. And for all but the parks and preserves, there is at least one new UDO zoning district that we think is appropriate to use in each of those place types. And as well as the 4 TOD zoning districts, which don't have a place type specifically, but they can be used in any of the centers districts if the parcel is in close proximity to transit. So just to familiarize yourself with the various place types, I'm sure that probably most of you have already been become familiar with that. Next slide, please. So just to go over what a commercial use is, like a commercial place is typically an auto-oriented area, establishment, a destination for retail, services, hospitality, dining, and so forth. Auto-oriented being one of the key phrases in that descriptor. And then we have 3 centers place types, ranging from the lowest intensity center, a neighborhood center, which is a small walkable mixed use area, typically embedded in neighborhoods with a variety of goods and services, as well as residential. To our next most intense center, a community activity center, also a mixed use area, which is typically along a transit corridor or a major roadway, also providing an array of goods, services, dining, entertainment, as well as residential uses. And our highest intensity center, regional activity centers. These are large areas, mixed use again, typically along transit or major roads that provide goods and services, dining, offices, entertainment, and also have residential. The regional activity centers generally draw from a broader range of the community, and think of areas like Uptown as being our primary regional activity center. South Park is another that I can think of. Next slide, please. So in this text amendment, this is to address some inconsistencies that will be created when the UDO goes into effect on June 1st. Some activity centers will have parcels that will translate to the CG, which is the General Commercial District zoning district, on June 1st. These are any parcels that are currently zoned B1 or B2. They will automatically translate to the CG zoning district. However, some of those parcels are in centers, and ordinarily in a CG zoning district, you could have auto-oriented uses like a drive-through, an accessory drive-through, and also in the CG zoning district, it normally would not allow multifamily residential uses. So these are both inconsistent with our goals for centers place types. You can see on the map an actual example of a site that's currently zoned on B1. It's on 7th Street in the Elizabeth neighborhood in a neighborhood center place type. And this parcel would translate to CG. And if that were ever to redevelop, without this text amendment that we're talking about, you would not be able to do residential uses, and you would be able to do some auto-oriented uses, both of which are contrary to the goals of our comprehensive plan. Next slide. So these are the changes that are proposed in this text amendment. Accessory drive-throughs, which are the drive-up portion of a business like a restaurant or a bank or a pharmacy. It's an accessory use to the primary use. If you wanted to do one of these in a commercial zoning district that was in a centers place type, it would require a conditional rezoning in order to be able to do that. And it would use the standards of the NC, the Neighborhood Center Zoning District. Also in this text amendment, it would permit multifamily residential uses in these commercial zoning districts if they were located in a centers place type. That's consistent with our goals for centers. And then finally, it would not allow a drive-through establishment. And the difference between a drive-through establishment and an accessory drive-through is the drive-through establishment is its own primary use, and that's a business where all transactions occur by vehicle through a drive-up window and not as an accessory to another business like a restaurant or a pharmacy. Next slide. So that is the summary of the text amendment 2023-057. And I see that there have been some questions in chat. I don't know if we want to stop and address them before moving on. Kevin or Laura, if you can help me out.
I think we
Nope.
have addressed the ones that are related. Well,
Yep.
I think they're separate from the text amendment. So I'd suggest that if it's not related to the text amendment, that maybe we hold those to the end. And anyone who wants to stay on, we can try to answer or direct how to find. So I don't think we have anything related to the text amendment in the chat.
Thank you. Yep. Now that I'm catching up, I don't see any questions or comments that are related to this particular text amendment. So before we move on to the next text amendment, kind of last call on questions on this one. Hearing, seeing nothing. I'm not seeing anybody typing. Kevin, you want to move on to your section?
Sure. Thanks, Alan. Good evening, everybody. Want to touch base with you briefly on our third UDO text amendment. This is petition number 2023-056. This is concerning land clearing and inert debris, often abbreviated to LCID landfills. And just to give a foundational base for what an LCID landfill is, it is a facility for the disposal of inert debris, land clearing debris, yard waste, and untreated and unpainted wood. This is a use that is currently rarely proposed in our jurisdiction. And to that point, because this use over the years has occurred so infrequently, we have found that our current regulations in the zoning ordinance and the language that was carried forward from the zoning ordinance into the UDO was really out of step with where we had come over a period of time to today for this land use. And really, we have found that areas of concern centered around community concerns about the environmental and land use impacts of this specific use, and that it was currently going to be allowed in all UDO zoning districts with prescribed conditions. To address these concerns, the current text amendment proposes some changes, primarily with where this use can be located, rather than it being located allowed to be located everywhere in all UDO zoning districts. The amendment would narrowly tailor it to only be located in our manufacturing and logistics ML2 zoning district. So therefore, rather than in all zoning districts, limiting it to the most appropriate zoning district, it would add a requirement for a conditional zoning approval, which allows more community input on the appropriate location and the conditions for the land use approval. And then lastly, it would modify the prescribed conditions and update them for what this type of facility should really function with. And that is to modify its operational conditions, create a requirement for a liner and leachate collection system, and also ensure compliance with state groundwater and surface water requirements. And really, those modified and updated prescribed conditions strike at the heart of strengthening the standards to allow better protection to our environment and the surrounding community. And I will say, excuse me, that we, the planning staff that is, worked closely with our city and county subject matter experts in our city solid waste and our county solid waste departments, because this isn't necessarily our wheelhouse, and it's through their spirit of partnership that we were able to come with a more up-to-date and in-step set of standards that we're proposing in this text amendment. I believe that is it, if anybody has any questions. Alan, happy to pivot it back to you.
Yes, next slide, please, Kevin. Not seeing any questions, but for general UDO questions, we're going to direct you to an email address. And for example, I see that Andy entered a question in chat that was not really related to these text amendments, but was more specific to the UDO. You can send questions of that nature to this email address, cltudoquestions@charlottenc.gov, and they will be handed over to the appropriate staff for a response back to you. That is the best way. And also, I'd like to just call your attention to our UDO website. It's charlotteudo.org, and you'll find information not only on these text amendments, but on the UDO as well, where you can read the UDO or also get more information about the UDO. And finally, I think we've got one more slide to go over. This is our schedule going forward. We filed these text amendments on February 27th. Our UDO advisory committee has reviewed the LCID landfills text amendment and the use adjustments in centers text amendments in March. We have updated the text amendments that we filed on March 20th based on some feedback that we received. Today is our virtual information session. We had one at noon today, and this is our final one this evening. The City Council will hold a public hearing on these text amendments, all four of them, at their zoning meeting on Monday, April 17th. The zoning committee will make a recommendation on the 3 UDO text amendments at their meeting on May 2nd. And finally, the City Council will vote on each of these text amendments at their meeting of May 15th. And with that, I believe that covers all of the material that we have ready tonight.
Yeah,
Andy?
apologies. I
Yeah.
can't get my slide deck to advance. I don't know why.
Well, that's it. That was
That
really
was
the-
it. That's
that was really
why.
the last slide. Yeah, we don't have a slide that says the end. So that's it. We thank you for joining us tonight. I'm not seeing anything. Thank you for thanking us, Alan. We appreciate your being here. Not seeing any other questions that we haven't tried to answer in chat, but we'll stay here for another minute or two until anything comes to mind. But if not, we've shared that where you can send us your questions if you happen to think of something after we get off this meeting later or at any time at all. Go to our Charlotte UDO website and you will be able to find that email address to send some questions our way. Any other staff have anything that I may have not said that I should have said?
No, just at this point, if there are any general questions, we can try to answer them. Sorry to hold off on them earlier, but to keep our focus, wanted to do that. But
Yeah, I think,
certainly hang around for a few minutes and answer anything that we
it
can.
looks like Andy left. Yeah, we just have Jim and Ellen here. Jim and Ellen, if you've got anything, now would be the time. If not, we're gonna close this meeting.
Okay. Seems like we've covered it.
Yeah, I just exited Jim and Ellen.
Ellen did put in the chat that she's going to email over her question. I'm not sure if that's a separate question or just a follow-up quest on
Yeah.
the parapet question, but I suspect it might just be a thing reminder.
Yeah,
On
if
the
it's
parapet.
other questions, yeah, I hope she didn't get confused and email questions about the text amendment to that other address, but
Ellen, Joe, thank you so much for your
Yes.
availability this evening. I think we can release you all. You all are good to go. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Yeah, thank you.
thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Laura, quick question on what we talked about prior to the meeting. Were you asking for that tonight or tomorrow?
No, are you able to get it in the morning?
I don't remember what my calendar looks like in the morning, but yeah, let me look real quick because that'll determine it. Because obviously at the end there, I was not in the right mind of when this thing now was happening.
What happened?
He was
I
thinking
lost track of
this was at
time.
7. He was gonna join at 7.
I was gonna open the
Oh.
meeting at 7. Yeah,
Oh.
no, the morning works. I can do that.
Okay, good.
All right, let
And
me.
hey, Sandy, I responded to your
Yes, I
question.
saw that.
Okay, does that make sense to you?
Yes, I just read that kind of differently. Thank you for clarifying.
All right, chat
think
is
we're-
saved. Probably should have ended the recording a while ago, but I forgot that I was doing that. Let me stop sharing as well. Jeez Louise.